Sometimes I close my eyes and I can still hear the roar of the cannons. My name doesn't matter. I just know that I survived something no city should ever have to go through. I saw convents burn. I saw the walls of my house shake with every explosion. I saw my neighbors carrying gunpowder while children ran among ruins that no longer looked like streets, but open graves. They say Zaragoza fell, but I swear to you what I saw was not a defeat. It was an entire city refusing to die in silence. If you want to understand what happened here, let me tell you from the inside.
Imagine winning a battle, and your only reaction is feeling disgusted. 35,000 French soldiers with a single order wiped Zaragoza off the map. They thought it would last a few days, but they encountered something that defied military logic. Women manning cannons, priests fighting with knives, and a general who, when asked to surrender, responded with one of the harshest phrases in history. Surrender? After I'm dead, we'll talk. It was so brutal that the French marshal himself wrote to Napoleon, "Sir, this war is horrifying. Victory brings sorrow." Zaragoza, 54,000 dead, the Napoleonic Stalingrad. To understand the magnitude of this disaster, we have to look at the map. It's the end of 1808. Napoleon, furious about the defeat at Bailen and the first failed siege of Zaragoza, decides that enough is enough. He crosses the Pyrenees himself to crush the Spanish rebellion. Zaragoza was not an impregnable military fortress. It was known as the Florence of Spain, a city rich in art, church, and commerce, but it had become a symbol, a bone in the throat of the empire. In command of the defense is General Palafox, a charismatic man who had achieved something impossible, uniting regular soldiers, peasants, priests, and women into a single volunteer army. They knew the French would return, but something happened. Great Britain, Napoleon's enemy, sent General Charles Doyle with a vital gift. "Here you go, sir. 8,000 of the finest rifles. The English donation. Caravans loaded with 8,000 new rifles, gunpowder, and uniforms." Suddenly, peasants and craftsmen were wielding military muskets capable of piercing a French uniform at 100 meters. Colonel St. Genis, a genius engineer from Huesca, worked day and night repairing walls and reinforcing, fortifying convents, but time was running out on December 21st. Finally, 35,000 infantry soldiers arrived, 2,000 cavalry, and, most terrifying of all, an artillery park capable of demolishing mountains. "In command, Marshal Lannes." His order was simple: take Zaragoza at any cost. Soon the French took key positions, such as Mount Torero. From there, they could bombard the city at will, but when the French infantry tried to enter the city, thinking the Spanish would flee at the sight of their bayonets,
"We surrender without a fight because you are very strong."
they were in for a deadly surprise. The defenders did not retreat. The Castilla Volunteer Regiment and the common people fought with a fury that the French veterans couldn't understand. Seeing that a direct assault was suicide, Lannes changed tactics. He decided to do what the manuals dictate: dig trenches, bring the cannons closer, and blow up the walls piece by piece. On January 15th, the Pilar Redoubt fell. The outer defenses are broken. The French are already inside the city in any other war of the time. This is where the defender surrenders. The wall has fallen, honor is saved, Peace is signed and everyone goes home. But Zaragoza did not surrender. When the French crossed the walls, they discovered with horror that the war was not over. It had just begun. This is where Zaragoza enters the dark legend of the war. Lands realized that every convent, every house, and every warehouse had become an independent fortress. Marshal Bugeaud, who was then a French lieutenant, described it like this.
We had a part of the city, but the inhabitants seemed to want to bury themselves under the ruins. They defended themselves with incredible fury, and each house required a particular siege that damned Zaragoza.
The French tactic was brutal. The sappers mined the ground floor walls to break through to the next house without going out into the street. The Spaniards, for their part, made holes in the walls and floors. If the French entered the living room, grenades and boiling oil rained down on them from holes in the ceiling. They fought on the stairs, they fought in the basements, in the dark, with knives where you didn't know who you were stabbing until you heard the scream. It was a psychological war. The imperial soldiers, used to quick victories on the plains of Europe, were breaking down mentally. The convent of Santa Ingracia was blown up, the university was looted, the archives of the Deputation were burned, but the most shocking thing was the civilian participation. They weren't just soldiers, they were women dragging the wounded under fire. They were children carrying ammunition. They were elderly people blocking doors with their own furniture. Marshal Lannes, desperate, writes to the emperor, "What a war, what men, a siege on every street, a mine under every house." Being forced to kill so many brave men, or rather so many furious ones, this is terrible. The French army advanced meters a day, paying for every step with blood. But then an enemy appeared against whom neither courage nor bayonets could fight. By February, Zaragoza did not fall by force of arms. It fell to decay. Sanitary conditions collapsed. Corpses piled up in the streets because no one had the strength to bury them. And with the filth, typhus arrived. Typhus was the real victor of the siege of Zaragoza. It killed 500 people a day. I repeat, 500 a day. Men who had survived cannon fire died raving with fever. Within hours, General Palafox himself fell seriously ill, no longer able to give orders. The city had become a living cemetery. The smell of death reached for miles, making even the French in their trenches vomit. Finally, on February 21, 1809, the Defense Council, with Palafox out of action, signed the surrender. Not because they wanted to stop fighting, but because there was no one left with the strength to lift a rifle. When Lannes's troops finally entered the city center, there were no triumphant parades. The French soldiers walked in silence, covering their noses, looking with respect and fear at the skeletal specters emerging from the ruins. A Prussian officer serving with the French described the defenders as
a crowd of peasants, young people and women, indifferent to death, smoking and looking at us with contempt.
The price was astronomical. Of the 55,000 citizens who were there before the sieges, 12,000 survived, 54,000 people died in total, including refugees who had come in. The French lost 10,000 men, an unacceptable number for Napoleon. In a simple procedure, Lannes, true to his relentless nature, ordered the execution of religious leaders, such as Father Bolero Santiago Sas, throwing their bodies into the Ebro. But Napoleon made a mistake. He wanted to wipe out Zaragoza to teach Spain a lesson, but he achieved the opposite. The resistance of Zaragoza inspired all of Europe. It showed that the imperial army was not invincible if it was faced with enough willpower. Today, the streets of Zaragoza still bear the scars of those days. Puerta del Carmen. The bullet impacts are still there, 200 years later, reminding us that there was a moment in history when an entire city preferred to die rather than kneel. If this story impressed you, imagine what those who were there must have felt. Did you know the details of this war of minds? What event or character would you like to see brought back to life next? Leave it in the comments. I read all of you.